racial equity or racial justice is such an important issue that several executive orders were signed into law in a few days after President Biden took office. Another word for racial justice or racial equity is identity politics. So, exactly why this idea is so dominant or so embraced in the United States in recent years. What are the common myths of identity politics? And what does identity politics do to the United States and lead us to? Mike Gonzalez, the senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, believes that identity politics actually is a plot to change America by dividing this free land. And that's the name of the book he recently published. Mike is a widely experienced international correspondent, a commentator, and an editor who has reported from Asia, Europe, and Latin America. He also served in the George W. Bush administration. So, in this episode, I invite Mr. Gonzalez to talk about everything around identity politics, including the topics such as identity politics actually also happened in the Communist China and the Mao era, and how to deal with identity politics in the United States. So, Mike, welcome to our show. First of all, could you explain to us what exactly is identity politics and what does it do?
Sure. So a lot of people have misconceptions about identity politics. They believe that it's just, the way it used to be, getting the Irish vote or getting the Dutch vote in New York. It's not at all that. Identity politics reimagines America, not as a united nation, as a united country, but as a confederacy of categories, of different categories, and divides these categories into the categories that are the oppressed in categories that are the oppressors. And so you have identity politics then is extremely divisive because you have people who are deemed to be on top, people who are deemed to be marginalized. And what it does is it does many things, right? It tries to instill in the members of the categories of the oppressed a sense of victimhood, a sense of grievance. So if you're marginalized, it's because America is systemically racist, America is systemically sexist, structurally racist and sexist. We need to change all the structures, the institutions, and the system itself. It's a way, that's the reason I call my book The Plot to Change America, because its goal is to change America, dismantle the capitalist system, the system of free markets, where people are allowed to have individual private ownership of goods and means of production, and create another system in which you have something closer to central planning, in which the government is in charge. We lose many rights. We lose the right to property. We lose the right to free speech. We lose the right to freedom of conscience. We lose many, many things. And so that is the reason why I think it is so dangerous to us. And why I've dedicated a lot of my time to fighting identity politics. The first thing you need to do about it is dispel the myths. There are many myths.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think the logic they have to segregate the different groups? How does that relate to get rid of the capitalism and free market?
Well, they say that one of the reasons that the members of these so-called oppressed categories are marginalized is because of capitalism. They're very open about this, very explicit. All the leaders, all the founders, the co-founders of the Black Lives Matters organizations, all the so-called critical race theory trainers, such as Ibram X. Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, Angela Davis, all of them say that capitalism is racist. It's inherently racist because capitalism produces winners and losers. And what they preach, and I'm sorry to say, Vice President Kamala Harris also agrees with this, is they want to have equal outcomes. They promise equal outcomes, and they say we have to have unequal treatment. That's what equity is. Equity is the opposite of equality. And so that's what they're preaching now. But what their main target really is the free market system, is capitalism. And that's the reason I call my book The Plot to Change America. Not because you have a conspiracy of people meeting in basements in Berkeley or Los Angeles or Madison, Wisconsin on Thursday nights, it's because the whole system, the whole philosophy behind it is a philosophy to change America and get rid of the capitalist system, a capitalist system that has attracted millions of immigrants like you or me to come to America to partake in the huge levels of liberty and prosperity that we have because of capitalism.
Mike, you raised a very interesting question about equity versus equality. And, just a couple of days ago, President Biden signed those racial equity executive orders. So, why you think equity is actually opposite of the equality?
Well, I have the order that he signed on his first day in office. I'm writing on it. It's got a very long name: Executive Order on Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities through the Federal Government. It is a recipe for disaster. It is the word equity is mentioned 21 times. And you know how many times the word equality is mentioned? Zero times. Now, the word equality is included in our most prized ideal principle, which is all men are created equal. Created equal. The word equality is included in our in the 14th Amendment with the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, which is supposed to say that the government is supposed to treat all Americans impartially with the same set of laws. Equity, then, is the functional, as I say, the functional opposite of that. Equity says the government must treat Americans not impartially with color blindness, but unequally. We must give members of categories unequal resources. First of all, that assumes that one size fits all, that everybody with a Hispanic surname is a victim that needs greater resources. That is awfully paternalistic and just plain awful. Or that somebody who is a second generation graduate from Harvard who is in a law firm that because his parents immigrated from Korea or Taiwan that they are victims. That is a completely wrongful approach. But what equity promises, as I've said, is equal outcomes. Equal outcomes. Unequal treatment is un-American. It goes against our best principles. We have tried this and it failed. Equal outcomes is not American. It's a Marxist concept. And by the way, it always fails. Marxism is perfect in only one way. It has a perfect record of failure everywhere it has been tried. So while the executive order, its definition of equity, it gives a definition of equity, as many words, I'm not going to bother to read it to you, but it never says we're going to treat people unequally. It does say that it's going to treat people that equity calls for fair and just treatment. And everything's going to depend on how administrators interpret the words fair and just. But I actually prefer the way our Vice President Kamala Harris, she is very open about this. She doesn't hide the ball. She says equity means unequal treatment and equal outcomes. So I believe she's speaking the truth, and I'm going to use her definition of equity and not go with the definition here in this executive order, which tries to play hide the ball.
You mentioned that there are a lot of myths. So, what are the important myths you would like to explain to our audience?
Well, a myth that I go into at length in my book, The Plot to Change America, is that all these ideas come from the grassroots. That is not the case. The myth is that these are all cries for recognition from people who have hitherto not been recognized and have been treated unjustly. These ideas were really opposed by Mexican Americans, for example. They were opposed by Chinese Americans. The people who discussed these things back then in the 60s and 70s were very open. The Ford Foundation paid for a UCLA survey of Mexican Americans in the Southwest. and they came back with the findings that Mexican Americans did not think they were victims of that they were victims, that did not think that they were minorities, that did not think they were oppressed. They recognized that they received unequal treatment, but they thought they could correct things individually. They were horrified to find that. Much more recently, in 2015, when the Obama administration tried to create the category of MENA, of Middle East, North Africa, for Americans who hail from this part of the world, and a group of experts, so-called experts, met in the Census Bureau building in Maryland. They actually openly discussed, and the transcripts are there, that Arab Americans did not want to have the MENA category. And what they said was, well, once they realize that they're going to get benefits out of it, that they're going to go to the front of the line through affirmative action, they'll like the category and they will accept it. So this is what the main, most important myth is, that this is a grassroots driven thing. It is not. It comes from the grass tops. It comes from the intellectuals. Another myth, a second myth, is that identity politics will improve the life of individuals. That is plainly not the case. In fact, the proponents of identity politics very often will admit that the individual can improve his lot in life, get out of poverty, become middle class through hard work, but that would be joining the system. And that's not what they want. They want to change the system. Let me bring up a third myth, actually, that is important, one of the main myths, and that is that identity politics is necessary because we're increasingly diversified as a country because of demographic churning. That is a complete misreading of history. American demography has been churning from the very beginning. Huge numbers of immigrants began to arrive in the 1680s and 70s and 90s from Germany to places like Pennsylvania, where the locals were not very happy to have them. One famous colonial who was not very happy with Germans in Pennsylvania was Benjamin Franklin, who had some very nasty things to say about German Americans. He didn't think they were going to assimilate. The same with the Scots-Irish, who began to arrive in the 1710s and were not welcome with open arms in Massachusetts. Then when they went to Pennsylvania, they were not welcome there either. And they went to Virginia and were told by the governor in Williamsburg that they could not practice their Presbyterianism, that they could only do so in the mountains of Appalachia. And that's why so many people in Appalachia today are of Scots-Irish ancestry. And then we had an explosion of immigration from the 1840s on. I think 7 million Germans ended up coming, many million Irish. We have more Irish here in this country than Ireland has. And we had Ellis Island then, starting in 1893, with people from Syria and Sicily and Lebanon and Poland and Hungary and Greece, people who were darker complexioned. And that was incredible demographic churning. At no point in our history did we say to ourselves, oh, we're going to take these people and teach them that they're victims, that they're marginalized, that we're going to put them into minorities, put them into new categories, and that they deserve compensatory justice, and that they deserve to have all these benefits. That's crazy and divisive. We did the opposite. We said, this is a great country. You're going to be treated equally. And if you become an American, we'll think of you as an American and we'll treat you as an American. And we hope in exchange that you give us your loyalty and that you learn our history and you learn about our culture and the cultural habits that have succeeded. We have what used to be called the American civic religion, which is an understanding of the founding, an understanding of the Constitution and Declaration. We have nothing else to bind us together. We come from different races. We come from different national origins. We have different religions. So we have these founding institutions, which is why the left wants to destroy them. Only after 1965, with the most recent wave of immigrants, have we said, oh, no, this time is different, and they are to be victims, and we're going to have categories, and they're going to be minorities, and we're going to teach them to hate America. We've always been a multi-ethnic nation. We have never been a multicultural nation until now, when they had trying to say all the cultures are just equally valuable. We're going to have all these cultures living together. I mean, no, we have cultural traits as Americans. we're very attached to liberty. We're very attached to self-sufficiency. We're very attached to hard work. These are cultural traits that is important for people to understand and assimilate to.
Okay, wonderful. So, Mike, can you elaborate a little bit more about the difference between multi-ethnic and multicultural?
So we've always been multi-ethnic. We have many different people. Americans come from many different parts of the world. We have people from Africa. We have people from Germany. We have people. That's the largest group, by the way. German Americans is the largest ethnic group in the United States, larger than people from the British Isles. They're going to be overtaken by people, Americans whose national origin is Mexico soon. Mexican Americans, there are 36 million and growing. So that's going to overtake Germans soon. So America has always been a multi-ethnic country. What it has never been is a multicultural country. There were some intellectuals in the 1920s and the 1910s who wanted to America to be multicultural, and in fact, leaders of both parties, Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt, Louis Brandeis, fought hard against this and said, no, there's an American national identity that is important. We have national traits such as hard work, self-sufficiency, and an exceptional attachment to liberty. We're the only country in the world that is set up on natural rights, where the government derives its legitimacy from natural rights. No other country is based that way. We're the only country with a birth date. And that birth date is July the 4th, 1776. These are important things for immigrants to understand and adhere to. And that is why I oppose multiculturalism, because multiculturalism says, no, we're going to have different standards for different groups. That is really what the Ottoman Empire was, where you had millets, where people were treated differently with different laws that applied to them according to their category. That's not America. We're not the Ottoman Empire.
Who and why this identity politic was started?
This is to do with a political project to instill different categories with grievances in order to change the country. This is a group of people, Marxists, who have been trying to change America for many, many years, for the last 170 years, since 1848, since the Communist Manifesto was written. They call themselves different things. Some of them call themselves socialists. Some of themselves are more honest and call themselves communists. Others call themselves Marxists. But Marx and Engels, who wrote the manifesto, did not really establish much of a difference between socialism and communism. It's all about central planning. So that is the point of departure, not the Hart-Celler Act in 1965. The attempt to make America become less free and more central planning and be less capitalist begins almost at the beginning, when the Communist Manifesto is written in 1848.
Right.
This new strategy begins in the late 60s and really gets underway in the 70s and 80s. In 1974, the year that the first National Advisory Committee on Race and Ethnicity is created by the Census Bureau, we have a very low percentage of the foreign-born in this country, probably the lowest ever. It's like 4.6% of Americans are born overseas. 4.6% of American residents are born overseas. And yet we create that year the first National Advisory Committee on Race and Ethnicity.
It reminds me, because we came from mainland China, where Communist Party got their power and the ruling. So they differentiated the classes, like the landlords, the peasants, farmers.
Yeah, the red categories and the black categories of Mao. And the red categories were good and the black categories were bad. This is the same thing. It's identity politics.
Okay, so you think it looks different, but it's the same thing.
It doesn't look different. It looks exactly the same to me. It has to do whether the powers that be, the critical race theory powers that be, have decided that you belong to a category of the oppressed and a victim, whether you're a woman who grew up wealthy, or any of the 32 members of the 32 gender identities of the New York City Civic Rights Commission. All of them are victims as well, no matter how wealthy they are, no matter what degrees they have from Harvard. Nothing to do with pigmentation. Pigmentation is one aspect of it, but it's whether you belong to a victim category or a category of the oppressor class. It's the same thing that Mao did. The same thing that Mao did.
Yeah, the oppression class and the victim class.
Yes.
So why this type of theory could just allow those people to grab power?
Because first of all, they think that when we reach the point where the majority of the country it belongs to the victim classes, a majority minority country, then they will have enough upset voters filled with grievances that they'll vote for somebody who'll come along and promise equity, to promise to have unequal treatment. Whether we have reached this point with this election remains to be seen, but that's how they hope to gain power, is through this majority minority country. Rui Teixeira wrote a book about this. He's one of the big proponents of this. He wrote a book in 2001, I believe. It is also, they will gain power through intergroup negotiations. They have gained power in the cultural institutions. The left, and a very hard left, is in complete control of the entertainment industry, of the academy, the universities, and the media. So they already have incredible power. Now that you can look at big tech. Big tech is all in Northern California. I took a look at the donations from Twitter employees. I believe they were 99% to 1 in the amount they gave to the Democrats and Republicans. We're a very split country. We're 50-50 almost. The Congress is split, the House is split, the Senate is split, and yet the hard left is really in control. And now we have an executive order that mentions the word equity 21 times and equality not once.
You also raised this critical race theory. Actually, right now in California, they are really pushing for it in the education system. So could you explain to us like how this critical race theory came about?
Well, it's actually as an Americanized version of critical theory. Critical theory emerges in a school called the Frankfurt School that was first in Germany, and then they went to New York in the mid 30s, and they come up with this idea of critical theory in an essay in 1937 in the manifesto of the school, critical theory and traditional theory. And then critical theory is just a way of criticizing all the institutions of the West and reducing them to dust, really, by incessant criticism. And then critical race theory borrows from that and from critical legal theory and sees everything through the prism of race and says, well, it is really about race. It is that America is systemically racist, and that is how we need to get rid of the system itself. All of the studies, for example, the ethnic studies department, they all belong to critical race theorists. And as you know, in your state, you will not be able to graduate from the California State University system without having taken a course in ethnic studies now. And I believe that is also coming to K through 12. That is very bad news for California. But I must say that I must really praise you for the fact that even in as blue a state as you're in, you really defeated the racial preferences of of affirmative action in the affirmative action vote that you had last year on January 3rd, 2020, in that proposition that was defeated by a very large number, I believe 11%. So California really is, in many bad ways, but in a very good way in this case, an example for the rest of the country. And it came really because Chinese Americans really organized. Chinese American parents, the majority of whom not born here, who studied the system, understood the system, and were able to use the system very intelligently to prevent a very bad thing from happening. I really commend you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, it happened actually, even before that, like 2014, the SCA 5, they tried
Right.
to, yeah, so then it's last year.
Yeah, they'll keep trying, by the way. They'll keep trying. And you need to be very vigilant.
It seems to people, it's like all of a sudden, just in recent years, it just become just so prominent and a lot of people seems to be accepting it. How
Because they
did
don't
it?
understand what it is. It has become the software of the country. It really is and we need to get rid of it because that software has a virus, and the virus will kill the hardware. And we need to get rid of it. People need to be exposed to it. We need to expose it for what it is. It's a way to change the country. That's the reason why I named my book "The Plot to Change America," and I explain everything in it. And I urge your listeners and watchers to buy my book, "The Plot to Change America," on Amazon. It's selling quite well, actually, because the country's in such dire straits. Because I explain things very well there.
Mm-hmm.
The really bad thing about this is that it hijacks our best impulse as humans, which is the impulse to be compassionate to the marginalized. This says we're only being compassionate here to the marginalized. We need to redress their grievances, but this is not fixing anybody's life. Not a single individual or family gets a better life because of this. And we need to say that is a lie. This is not compassionate. Compassion is allowing people to flourish, creating policies and institutions in ways that allow the individual and her family and his family to flourish.
Mm-hmm. I interview a lot of people, and I found that a lot of Americans, they, on one hand, they will say, "Oh, I don't like communism." On the other hand, they are embracing, very leftist
Because they don't
ideologies.
know, they have to be exposed to it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, how?
That's what I do all day. I speak about it. I write about it. I give interviews. I try to make sure that my fellow Americans do understand this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what are the other ways you think? What else people can do?
But they need to speak up. They need to attend school board meetings and speak up. And they need to understand. They need to buy my book. They need to read. They need to understand what is being done in their name.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks for everything you do.
Mike Gonzalez, the author of The Plot to Change America: How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free. Thank you for watching, and please let us know how do you think of the topics that we touch upon in this interview. And if you like this show, please remember to click like, subscribe, and spread the word of our channel. I'd really appreciate it. This is Cathy Zhang with the Sound of Hope News. I will see you next time.